I'm Andrew Clark, and I direct the Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy at Central Connecticut State University. And this is Make It Happen May, our 2020 annual reentry reform WEBEX series, which had been an event planned at the Capitol in April, but we've been doing a series now since the beginning of April on every Wednesday at 10 o'clock to discuss pressing issues regarding prisoner reentry, especially in light of the coronavirus. So today, we have decided to focus on civic engagement. Last week we talked about employment, we've addressed housing as well, and we figured we'd end May with Make It Happen May, of how people can get engaged themselves in the project, in the process of change. And so we'll be talking about voting and voting rights, especially with regard to folks with felony and criminal convictions. We'll also be talking about the 2020 census. It's in a really important time in our country right now, which has been very disrupted by the coronavirus. So we'll hear the latest on how people can sign up to the census, why it's important, and especially why it's important in terms of how people are counted. And we'll have a discussion about prison gerrymandering. And then we'll finally end with elected officials, former elected officials, and advocates talking about how they got involved in the process, why they got involved in the process, especially in light of their connection to the criminal justice system and folks impacted. So we'll start with voting rights, and we are very lucky to be joined by one of the first members of the Connecticut Reentry Collaborative, Dan Braccio. And Dan is now retired, but he was the former co-chair of the Bridgeport Reentry Collaborative. Dan, it's nice to have you on today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Andrew. I appreciate it.
And so what we will do right now is I will play a little video, and maybe Dan, you can give us a little background on this. It's a PSA on voting rights for individuals with criminal histories.
Sure. This was part of the grant proposal that we submitted to the Fairfield County Community Foundation to create a PSA that would inform justice-involved people about their eligibility to register to vote. And we engaged with Red Shoe Films, Brian Russell, very creative video developer who's worked a lot with the nonprofit community. And we kind of put the script together. And then we, of course, erased that script because it was too long, and we cut it down. And we came up with the script that you'll see for Secretary Merrill and the video information.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll just ask all the panelists to mute their mics, please, so we don't have feedback here. And I'll share the PSA, which is relatively short. It's about a minute long.
Hi, I'm Denise Merrill, Connecticut's Secretary of the State. Promoting and protecting the voting rights of all of our Connecticut citizens are among my most important responsibilities. I'd like to address those of you who have had involvement in either our state or the federal criminal justice systems. Even if you were formerly incarcerated, in Connecticut, you still have the right to vote. You can register to vote if you have completed confinement and parole, even if you've previously been convicted of a felony. You are eligible to register and vote if you're confined for a particular offense only, using your hometown address and an absentee ballot. And you're eligible to vote using an absentee ballot if you're being held in pretrial detention and have not been convicted of a felony. Know your rights. And remember, no vote is ever wasted. Please exercise your right to vote by registering in your community. You can even do it online. We need you to create a stronger Connecticut for all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you to the Bridgeport Reentry Collaborative for putting that together. And of course, voting rights has been in Connecticut and nationwide an evolving process, especially with regards to folks with felony convictions. And certainly right now, it's a period of uncertainty as well in terms of who can vote, how do they vote, is it absentee ballot? It's a question that's been going all around the country, and it's no different here in Connecticut. And we're lucky to be joined by Mary Janicki, who we know very well at the IMRP, who worked with us on the Results First initiative. But prior to that, she was the director of the Office of Legislative Research at the Connecticut General Assembly, and she oversaw at a portion of her time the GAE committee, Government Administration and Elections, and knows very well election law in Connecticut. And so she's going to give us a little bit of a background and primer on who can vote. And we knew when we looked at this issue, it's actually been very confusing to figure this out. And then what's the current state of voting, who can register in absentee ballots and otherwise. And Mary, it'd be great to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Everyone, it's nice to participate in this meeting. And yesterday, Andrew asked me to take a look at some voting practices and procedures in other states as well as in Connecticut. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how voting occurs, and then also maybe expand a little bit on the restoration of voting rights for formerly incarcerated people. So we know that the U.S. Constitution has certain qualifications for voters, but generally the laws and regulations related to processes and deadlines and that sort of thing vary widely around the country. It's very decentralized. So voting occurs, though, in 3 different ways in categories that I'll describe. 5 states conduct elections entirely by mail. And these states are in the West. The state of Washington was the first to adopt all mail elections. Colorado, Oregon, Hawaii, Utah, and Washington are those states. That means that the voters get a ballot by mail. They vote and return the ballot. There are no polling places that are even open. So sometimes it's called kitchen table voting. Everybody votes by mail. In 29 other states and the District of Columbia, registered voters can request an absentee ballot application, but they don't need any particular excuse. This is no excuse absentee voting. You request a mail ballot and you send it in according to the directions in that state. Here in Connecticut, we're one of 16 states that requires citizens to provide a valid specified excuse to vote by absentee. In our region, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and New York also are states where you have to have a legitimate excuse as specified by law in order to vote by absentee ballot. In Connecticut, the reasons are somewhat restrictive. There are only 6. They're identified in the Constitution as well as in state statute, which is one of the reasons, because it's in the Constitution, it's a little bit harder to change. But under current law, the specified reasons for voting by absentee ballot are that a person is a member of the armed forces, they swear that they will be absent from the town where they vote during all the hours of voting, they have their own illness or physical disability, the tenets of their religion forbid them from secular activity on election day, or they are working as a poll worker during all the hours of voting. What the governor has done in light of the pandemic is issue Executive Order 7QQ. And that order was issued on May 20th, just last week. And under his executive order, people who choose to vote by absentee ballot because their own sickness due to COVID-19, or if there is no federally approved and widely available vaccine for prevention of COVID-19, they would be able to qualify and apply for an absentee ballot. And this will apply to the August 11th primary. The Secretary has said that she will be sending out absentee ballot applications to all eligible voters. I think there might be a little confusion about this because in a primary in Connecticut, only enrolled party members are eligible to vote in a primary. So the presidential preference primary, which was originally scheduled to be held in March, it was then postponed to May and then subsequently postponed to this August primary. That will be in August 11th, as will any contest for the nomination of a state senator or state representative office that is being contested. So those primaries are being combined, and only enrolled party members will be able to vote in either the Democratic or Republican primary. So again, I think we can talk a little bit about how people and the deadlines for registration. People would need to be registered to vote in the August 11th primary. If a person was unaffiliated or not registered at all, they could sign up to vote by noontime on August 10th in order to vote in the August 11th primary. Those absentee ballots for the primary will be available July 21st, and I would anticipate that Secretary Merrill will be sending out applications, if she's going to do that automatically, at some point in July. Again, as the Secretary described in the video a little bit, you can register to vote online on the Secretary's website. There are provisions for mail-in voter registration, and you can, of course, register to vote in the town office, town hall where you live. We have election day registration in Connecticut, so that if you miss the October 27th registration deadline, you can register again on election day. Election day registration, people need to be mindful of, happens at the town hall, but then you would have to go to the polling place where you're assigned and vote there. So that was one of the reasons why there were some long lines and some problems with delays with people voting on registering and voting on election day. You need to know that you can't do that all at once at the polling place. I want to talk a little bit about the voting rights and restoration for voting rights for people who have been incarcerated. Like other things, this is very decentralized, and different states have different provisions. In Maine and Vermont, we know that convicted felons never lose their right to vote, even while they are incarcerated. In 16 states and the District of Columbia, felons lose their voting rights only while they're incarcerated, and they're automatically restored as soon as they're released. In 21 states, including Connecticut, felons lose their right to vote during incarceration and for a period of time afterward, which here in Connecticut includes parole. And then in 11 other states, there are much more restrictive and indefinite reasons and periods when felons would lose and not be able to restore their voting rights. And that includes Florida, where there's been some litigation on that provision, or in states like Virginia, where your voting rights can be restored if you have a governor's pardon. So the statute in Connecticut for restoration of electoral privileges is section 9-46A. It's a little confusing, and I think Dan maybe referred to that. But the General Assembly has added provisions that require the Department of Correction commissioner to notify people upon their release that they are eligible to have their electoral rights restored. The commissioner sends the Secretary of the State's office a list of people who have been released each month, and the Secretary's office notifies municipal registrars of voters where those folks are returning to their residence, and they would know that the person is eligible to be to have their voting rights restored. I think that it's not clear whether it's an automatic restoration or whether the person has to go in and fill out the registration form, but with a new address. But there are provisions in the statute on how people get their rights restored, and that provision of the statute has been the subject of bills in the General Assembly recently that would remove that requirement that they be finished with parole, but we'll see. One more thing about the pandemic provision. The governor's emergency civil preparedness emergency declaration extends through September 9th. So that's why it covers the August 11th primary. The emergency declaration could be extended if they're going to do the same sort of thing for the November 3rd election, or the General Assembly may come in and make that change to the statute that would sort of relax some of those reasons for voting. Again, I think there still needs to be a constitutional amendment that makes it more clear, but we'll see what happens when things get back to normal, and for the at least for the legislature is concerned. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any. And Aleks can talk a little bit more about what the Sentencing Commission has done in terms of people who are in custody but have not lost their voting rights.
Right. Thank you so much, Mary. And that's a lot of information, valuable information you've given us. And I think what we will do is after this, we'll put it up on the ctreentry.org website, which we can share with everyone, the governor's executive order, and some a link to the Secretary of State's website, so that people can see exactly what needs to be done. And in terms of who is actually eligible to vote, I know that's why Dan got involved, and why at the Reentry Collaborative we've been pressing this issue as well, is because unlike places like Maine and Vermont, and we had someone from the Norway prison system on at the end of last month, where they don't take away any rights. The only rights they take away when someone is incarcerated is the right to freedom, because they want to create good neighbors. That people vote inside prison. Not only that, they actually have elected officials or people running for office come in and they have debates in the prison. So but when we looked at Connecticut law, there was kind of this urban legend of who could and who couldn't vote. And yet, when you actually read the statutes and you try to decipher it, it's not clear, because when they were written, parole meant something else. It was overseen by a whole different body. Now it's within the Department of Corrections, the supervision part, but now the Board of Pardons and Parole oversees that. So the Department of Correction oversees transitional supervision, which is not exactly parole, and and on and on and on. And it just wasn't entirely clear. And the message that we got was that, well, don't err on the side of caution. If you're not certain, don't vote. And I think we all thought that that wasn't the message that should be sent to a citizen who may indeed have that right. So we do have one question, and this is someone that asked, if someone is forbidden to enter a school by probation, would they be allowed an absentee ballot?
Not technically, I don't think, because I don't think that falls under the list that is in the statute. That's a tricky question, because it might be that at that point on election day that the school room or space where the election, where voting is being held, would not technically be considered a school at that point for that purpose.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, that's a good question.
Yeah,
But
so
technically, that does not fall under those 6 reasons that are in the statute.
okay, so maybe that's something we can follow up on, because that, I imagine,
Right.
would be an issue,
Mhm.
particularly for folks on the sex offender registry who may have that
Yep.
restriction on probation.
Mhm.
If you're on probation, you can vote, but the question is, can you actually go into a polling place if your
Right.
polling place is a school versus a church or something else? So, yeah, we can follow up on that. I'd like to move on now to Aleks, and Mary referenced Aleks. Aleks Tsarkov is executive director of the Connecticut Sentencing Commission. The commission took a look at this issue and then acted on it in this past, I believe it was November, with absentee ballots for folks that actually were eligible who were incarcerated at the time. So Aleks, maybe you can give us a little bit of that history and what the commission is up to now on the issue.
Well, thank you, Andrew and Mary, and everyone who has been organizing this serious and this important conversation. The Sentencing Commission is pretty new to voting issues. It started for us several years ago when the Commission has endorsed a proposal to provide people on parole with an ability to vote. And so Judge Devlin and others in the Commission have testified for several years on that proposal to restore voting privileges to people on parole. And as you probably know, Connecticut is one of the very few states, and the only state in New England currently that does not allow people on parole to vote. So we thought that was important. And then we started talking about those who are incarcerated but eligible to vote. Right? And we're talking about 2 groups of people here. One is people who have been convicted of misdemeanors, and 2, those who are being held pre-trial. Right? And we don't have in Connecticut preventive detention, so we're talking about people here who have not been convicted and are simply there because they can't post a bond. Right? So those 2 groups of people are eligible to vote, and we wanted to know what voting is like for them, whether it happens, whether there are any obstacles. We formed a small working group and brought together various stakeholders to kind of look into those issues. And we've had representatives from Unlock the Vote, ACLU, registers of voters, town clerks, great participation from DOC, probably forgetting some others, New Haven Legal Assistance. I'm sorry?
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State did not participate in this effort, but I hope they will going forward. We've had participation from Yale Law School, Quinnipiac Law School, faculty and students. And we've had a few meetings, and then we decided that the best way to really look into those issues would be to actually go to a facility, conduct a registration drive, absentee ballot application drive, and see what that looks like. And so in cooperation with DOC, and Trina Sexton has been great in this, we picked York to do this because we had to start somewhere, and that's the facility, that's the only female facility, and it also houses both sentenced and unsentenced population. So we started there, and I believe we registered about 140 people, probably more over that. And then we went back another time and did an absentee ballot application drive. And I think, those who participated certainly walked away with an experience of, we all felt like we did something important. And we've gotten great feedback, but we also learned a lot. And, a few of my takeaways, number one is that there's very little voting that actually happens in prisons in Connecticut. And this is apparent when you talk to people who have been incarcerated, and when you talk to people on the correctional side and DOC staff side. It's just, it's very rare. It has happened here and there, but it's very rare. Right? At the same time, it's very clear that there's a lot of interest. I mean, we were going from building to building, from facility to facility, because that's how York is set up, right? There's all these different units. And, we really had great conversations. There was, the audience was very engaged. We asked a lot of questions. And it's very, very clear to me that there's great interest in being able to vote. Right? And maybe the final takeaway is that the volunteer efforts are great, and we can really do a lot, and I hope we will do a lot for this particular election coming up. But at the same time, volunteer efforts are really limited, cumbersome, and not sustainable for what really needs to be done to make sure that voting is accessible. So long term, I hope everybody can come together, advocates, state officials, Secretary of State, DOC, to really come up with a meaningful and real solution, so that we don't have to go to York and other facilities every year, but so that it actually the voting happens automatically for those who are interested.
Thank you so much, Alex. Really important work being done. And you mentioned possible changes. There is going to be a legislative special session, it appears, at some point, and that's something that I'm sure advocates will be pushing. And I know there were some bills in the legislative committees that were going to be addressing who can vote, and potentially parolees and the like. So there is the possibility of that. But absent that, it would appear in this coming election that kind of grassroots effort and attempts, kind of ad hoc to get people to vote is going to be the way that it will happen. And I think one of the reasons, which I believe has curtailed this, is this belief that the prisoners will vote in for one particular party or the other. I saw a study done, actually the most extensive, and maybe Alex, who's on later, can talk about this. She might be familiar with it, but that it really isn't. It's not as one-sided as one would appear, and there's a lot of conservative, liberal, all mix of people inside prison, and so this politicization of voting rights, depending on who they believe someone will vote for, seems to be a non-issue. And so thank you so much. And I know we have a packed agenda. We're going to go on to the next part of it, but I do want to just have one last chance for folks to weigh in. I know, Dan, that PSA has been put together, and can that be shared? And I know there's some supplemental materials as well.
Yes, absolutely, Andrew. The video, we hope, will get wide distribution. Again, it's only a minute long. It's great for a group session. The printed materials that we made up specifically were meant to be distributed within Fairfield County because of the nature of the grant. But again, I think Rob Hebert has sent those copies to you, and we can get PDFs out to people that are interested. We have it in both English and Spanish, and the kind of color coded to go along with the voter registration cards, actually, so they don't get mixed up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and so great to hear your voice, Dan.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you.
And thank you, Mary, for all that information, and we'll be sure to get some of that up on the site, the ctreentry.org, so that folks are well aware of their rights to vote, both in the primary and the main election in November, whether it be by absentee ballot or otherwise. So thank you so much, Mary. And thank you, Alex. And we'll make sure to send a link to the Connecticut Sentencing Commission and the work that you're doing on this. And certainly, if there's any updates that you have of efforts, we'll share it with the Reentry Collaborative listserv. So thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
And now we're going to move on to another really important issue in terms of direct action and civic engagement in Connecticut, especially with regards to folks that have criminal convictions, and that's the 2020 U.S. Census. And following that, as part of it, we'll have a discussion about prison gerrymandering, because, as we did look into the issue of voting, and I know Alex found this out, where someone is registered is also a pretty tricky issue, even though they may be all living at York in one part of the state, they actually might be voting in some other place, but are counted as residents still in York. So we're going to move on to that discussion, the 2020 U.S. Census, and we have with us, delighted to have Michelle Riordan-Nold, Executive Director of the Connecticut Data Collaborative. And the Data Collaborative is a tremendous resource for much information. We actually work with them for our racial profiling initiative, the Alvin Penn Law, and they share all of the information. It's transparent on the truth extents. But it turns out that they also are the Census State Data Center, and therefore have a wealth of information about the Connecticut Census, what's happening now, and how has the coronavirus impacted it. So Michelle, the floor is yours. Please inform us about the Connecticut Census.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrew, for inviting me and having me. As Andrew mentioned, we are the designated Census State Data Center. Each state has a designated center. So we serve that role for Connecticut, which is serve as liaison between the public and the Census Bureau in terms of accessing and using census data. And then during Census 2020, we've tried to help in various ways to get the word out and spread the word. Okay, so thank you, Andrew, for having me. So we are the Census State Data Center. It is a national program, so every state has a designated state data center. So what that means is we serve as a liaison between the public and the Census Bureau in terms of accessing and using census data. And then, of course, during the decennial, which we're in now, Census 2020, we are helping to get the word out in any way that we can. So the Census 2020 is counting everyone once, only once, and in the right place. The Constitution requires it every 10 years. It started in 1790, and we're in our 24th census. So why is it important? Representation in Congress is based off of the population count, provides better data for better decision making. State redistricting also uses the population count. And then federal funding for state programs uses the decennial census data. So it's estimated that Connecticut receives about $10.7 billion annually in federal assistance based off of the decennial count. So in terms of our state funding, it's a huge chunk of annual funding that we receive. So who gets asked? So every household gets mailed a census, and those were mailed in March. And each household is assigned a unique ID, and one person in the household fills out the census for the people living in that household. So what is asked? So the question is, how many people are living in the house on 2020? So even though mailers went out in March, it was everyone must fill out where they're residing on April 1st. The census asks, is the household, is a unit a house, apartment, mobile home? Is it owned and rented? It does ask for telephone number for follow-up. It asks for the person who's filling it out's name, sex, age, date of birth, ethnicity, Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, and then race. And then your subsequent questions are for each person residing in the house. This is the first year that the census is being done online. So what people got in the mail in March, and hopefully you all received it and filled it out, was a code to go online and then answer the survey online. And online, there's 12 languages, including English. Also fill it out via phone, and they have 12 languages in English. And then the Census Bureau did provide instruction guides in 59 languages online. So where are we at with COVID-19? So the self-response portion of the census was supposed to go until July 31st, but it's been extended until October 31st. So what is happening now, and actually Connecticut's opened up, area offices opened up this week. We have 3 area offices in the state, Danbury, Hartford, and New Haven. They'll be putting census invitations and questionnaires, leaving those at front doors for those households that did not respond. Group quarters enumeration was supposed to end on June 5th, but it's now been extended until September 3rd. So group quarters includes prisons, it includes nursing homes and dormitories. And then after the self-response period, the Census Bureau starts the non-response follow-up. And so that's when typically they go knocking on doors and help people fill out the census form. So that has now been pushed back to start August 11th to October 31st. Now this is still proposed. Congress needs to vote on these extensions. So typically, here's 2 timelines. I know it's busy. The top line is the standard timeline that we would have followed had the pandemic not happened. And below is a proposed revised timeline for, and so there is, if Congress approves the pushing back of all the dates, there is a question with our state constitution in what, when will the counts be delivered for redistricting purposes? As the Constitution says, following the year following the completion of the census. And so if that's interpreted as 2020, it could possibly mean that we only have 2 months, the legislature only has 2 months to figure out the redistricting. If it's the year following the delivery of the data, then there's more leeway, right? It's the typical timeline. So there is, if the Congress, like I said, approves extension, we will then need to figure out what does that mean in terms of our timeline as written in the state constitution in terms of when we need to deliver the redistricting for the legislature. So where are we at today? So this is the most recent data. The census does update weekly, actually daily, but they're a few days behind in terms of the daily update, where we are in terms of our response. So right now, 64% of households in Connecticut have responded to the census. So we rank number 14 in the state. You can see the nation is 60% of households have responded. Here we're showing the 3 towns with the highest response rates and the 3 towns with the lowest response rates as of March 23rd data. And so what can you do? Help spread the word, promote self-response. I mean, we're still in self-response. We know we have heard that people thought that it was junk mail and might have thrown it. If that's the case, you can still go online and type in your address to fill out the census form. So what you would have gotten in the mail is a code, but what the Census Bureau will do is when you fill out your address, they will do a match to see if one was filled out or not for your address. So when COVID-19 hit, we created some flyers. I'll show you screenshots of them on the next slide, but you can go on our website too and print out the flyers. We distributed them to all the community foundations in Connecticut, and we're hoping that they would share it with grantees who are still doing direct service, like food banks, as an example. Reach out to us if you have ideas or you'd like us to create something that you could. We're happy to do that. So here were the flyers, and they're available on our website. If you are working in direct service and can hand them out just to tell people to fill out their census form, that would be great. And that is it.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. And we'll make sure to put that information up on the ctreentry.org site as well. And then potentially through the roundtables, we can print and distribute some flyers as well. I do have one question in terms of, so I know in filling it out myself, well, I guess maybe two questions. If you have children living with you half-time or not, so you're uncertain, do you fill them out here or where they spend the other half? And then the other question I have is, particular for this situation, are folks in prison filling these out, or is the Department of Correction filling it out for them?
Yeah, great questions, Andrew. So for the children, it's where they are on April 1st. So if it is a joint custody situation, whoever has the children on April 1st, that person fills it out. And, it is, children are often for undercounted, as has been found in the past. So that's April 1st is the key date there. And then the prisons fill out the census forms for the prisoners. They do not receive individual mailing. So there is a special group quarters enumeration that happens, and the prisons receive and fill out that information.
Okay, and so that leads us to the next topic that we'll be talking about here, which is prison gerrymandering, because you mentioned two significant reasons, at the very least, why the census is important. One is redistricting. So where people are counted. So if you showed towns that have 70% rates of response and towns with 49% rates, that can have a huge impact on whether or not you have 5 state representatives in Hartford or 4, and whether or not you have representation, and that weighs heavily on who's represented in your state legislature, and then also in the country, whether or not how many representatives we have relative to other states is really important in terms of response rates. And then the other is funding. So, again, in using that example, if there's more people counted, if you have a higher rate of return of those census forms in particular counts, then they also get a disproportionate amount of funding, because the census also helps to determine both federal and state funding, correct, Michelle?
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
So let's move on, and thank you so much, Michelle, for all this information. We know, as with voting, it's a lot to take in, but again, we will have follow-up information on ctreentry.org. But one of the things that this issue brings to light is the concept of prison gerrymandering, and that's where people are counted relative to where they're incarcerated or where they're from. And we're lucky to have with us Aleks Kajstura, legal director of the Prison Policy Initiative. The Prison Policy Initiative has been around for quite some time and has been a stalwart on this policy as well as many others. And Aleks, perhaps you can give us some background on what is prison gerrymandering and how does it impact in Connecticut, and what can be done prior to the final count on the census in terms of any potential changes.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be part of this conversation. So actually, let me start first by talking about the funding impact of the census, which often people kind of conflate with prison gerrymandering. And what happens is the way the census data is used is, or let's go back to the census is conducted, and then they publish their data. And then from there, everybody uses their data from different purposes. One of those purposes is redistricting. One of those purposes is funding formulas. And the way the census data is used in most funding formulas is that it doesn't really look at the total population. You look at discrete subsets of data. So when we found, when actually even the Prison Policy Initiative, when we first started looking at this 20 years ago, when we were looking at, I'm sure this shifts big amounts of funding. And what we found is it really doesn't. And I've personally looked at every funding formula in Connecticut, and prison populations just don't factor into it very much. If at all, they're part of just the total population that then gets divided, multiplied, and looked at ratios of different kinds of factors to the point where it's really diluted. So where the census miscount of incarcerated people matter is really in the representation and the skewing of that and the prison gerrymandering. So what is prison gerrymandering? So let's just start with gerrymandering itself. It's when legislators manipulate districts for a specific purpose. This can mean either choosing their own constituents, so choosing constituents that are likely to vote for you and drawing your district around that, or trying to make sure that one party or another will get the most legislators into the General Assembly. But as a general rule, every district has to have the same number of people in it. So it's up to the legislators to draw the lines, but they are confined by the population. What prison gerrymandering does is it takes it one whole step further, is it actually messes with the population numbers themselves. And they're able to do this because the population data that comes out of the Census Bureau counts incarcerated people as if they were residents of the correctional facilities rather than at home. So this is what it looks like. You have like 3,400 people, let's say, incarcerated at Robinson and Enfield institutions. And most of them are not Enfield residents, but a lot of them are in for misdemeanors. So as was mentioned earlier, they're still all eligible to vote, and they're voting by absentee ballot to their home addresses. So their actual representative is, let's say, somebody in New Haven, but they get counted as a constituent and toward the constituent district total of the rep out of Enfield. So there's a disconnect between the resident population of the state and the district populations for redistricting. And prison gerrymandering isn't really it's a rather blunt instrument of power. It causes subtle shifts within the legislature. And all of a sudden you have legislators from disparate districts that would have little in common, all of a sudden have this prison population that they feel like they're kind of a safe constituent population to have because they're not able to vote against you. If they're voting, they're forced to vote absentee ballot. And it really ends up skewing criminal justice reforms. In criminal justice policy, we've seen in a number of states that criminal justice reform packages just get stuck in committees that are headed by folks with large prison populations. And this is often at the core of the concerns. Andrew, I think, mentioned earlier, there was a study done by looking at the political leanings of folks who are incarcerated and their voting. And that was done by the Marshall Project. And their sample actually skewed a bit white for the prison population. So we're not really able to see what the overall prison population would vote like. But in terms of the white folks, it definitely kind of just matched national voting patterns based on various demographic breakdowns. So each kind of party, depending on the state, is convinced that, prison gerrymandering is a partisan issue, but it really is not. A great example of that is Illinois at the state legislative level. Both parties are convinced that ending prison gerrymandering would take them out of power. So it's not a blunt partisan, it's not really a partisan issue. It's about criminal justice issues. It's about making sure that everybody's counted at home for the representatives that actually represent them. And so that's kind of where the problem is. In Connecticut, you have folks that are incarcerated from all over the state, but it's really, folks are coming mainly from 5 large cities, and you have 7 majority white state house districts that contain a lot of small towns that are about at least 1,000 people each each of those districts have at least 1,000 people that are incarcerated that are mostly from residents elsewhere. And there's a clear racial justice issue at stake here too. You have African Americans in Connecticut are 9 times as likely to be incarcerated as white folks. Latinos 5 times as likely. And because the towns are situated in mostly far away white communities, it really creates a disconnect between the representatives and their constituents. So that's kind of where the problem is. So, but in order to see what the solution would be, to have kind of start where the problem came from. And it really just starts with the Census Bureau. In 1790, we had the first census, and like any good bureaucracy, they came up with some rules on, what to do with people who, you wanted to count everybody in the right place, count them only once. So how do you do that? And I think the question about children exemplifies that, the need for some rules here. So you have, what if you have more than one place that you live? What if you're homeless? Back then, George Washington was a popular example, traveled for work, lived in one place, worked in the White House in another, what would have been another district. But so the Census Bureau counts everybody where they live and sleep most of the time. We found that even though prisons may seem kind of monolithic institutions that are, always filled in your town, you might assume that that's where people sleep and eat most of the time. But even within, even if you're incarcerated for multiple years, you move between institutions. So it's not true at the personal level that person would eat and sleep most of the time at that prison. So that's a problem with just the census rules. But we are where we are. The Census Bureau is counting incarcerated people in the 2020 census at the location of facility. They're doing that mostly through administrative data. They're encouraging departments of corrections just to link up their data systems, and that's how they're collecting that data. So what can you do about it? For 2020, it's too late for the Census Bureau to change what they're doing, but states can move the process forward so that maybe there's going to be a change for 2030. And that's really frustrating because it's like a 10-year cycle, so you can only do so much. But it's working. What we're seeing is that right now we have 9 states that have state legislation that takes the Census Bureau's data. Like I mentioned earlier, once the census is done, it's done. If data is published, everybody can do with it what they need to do. So these 9 states are taking the data from the Census Bureau. They're taking data from their Department of Corrections that has everybody's home address. They're kind of cross-checking them and counting everybody back at home. And what the Census Bureau has done, because there's been enough pressure from the states now, that they're publishing additional data early so that states can make this adjustment easier, so that they're actually publishing where the Census Bureau counts incarcerated people. Because believe it or not, that wasn't even available last decade until way late in the process. So now a state can see, oh, this was actually a facility that was counted. Let's take those people out of there and count them at home. And what the Census Bureau is also doing is helping, just on the technical side, helping states run their home address data. So in order to do redistricting, you need to turn an address like the state might have, like 123 Main Street, you need to turn that into a plottable point on a map. So the Census Bureau is helping states out with that as well. So this pressure from the states is definitely helping move the Census Bureau along in the right direction. Now for Connecticut, I know you have this possibility of a late kind of special session coming up, and the window of opportunity is really closing on getting this reform done in Connecticut. You can still do it, I think, in the next couple months. New York and Maryland, who actually implemented their laws last decade, they were really late to passing their legislation. It was done actually after the census was over. And so now I know everybody's kind of stressing out about the census being behind on the redistricting timeline, but in terms of prison gerrymandering, this actually buys states a little bit of extra time because you have extra time now to process your data before this census data comes out so that you can merge the two files and count everybody back home. So so ideally Connecticut in the next couple of months would pass this legislation, would get their Department of Corrections data. I know it's a little bit incomplete, but it is far better than counting everybody in the wrong place. At least you'll get most of the people in the right place. So that would be optimal. The other thing that the state can do, and this is something that everybody can participate in, is once the redistricting process starts, even if the state is just using census data, what you can do is kind of follow the Massachusetts model. Now, Massachusetts ran into a problem last decade where they did not want to engage in prison gerrymandering. But unfortunately, the chairs of the redistricting committee concluded that they could not use an alternative data set, that the data as published by the Census Bureau was what the state constitution bound them to use. But what they did is they redistricted with the prison populations in mind, at least. So they knew where the prisons were. So they ensured that they didn't, accidentally lump too many of them into a single district, so that they spread the effects out as much as they could. So you don't count everybody at home, but you also don't get the effect of having a few districts that contain large portions of correctional populations that really skew the legislative power in the end. And so that's, I think, the way forward in Connecticut.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. There's, again, such a wealth of information, and we'll be sharing information. I know you sent me a few things from the prison policy site, and we'll make sure to include those in any emails that go out, as well as on our website for this web series. So thank you so much. And that allows us now to pivot to Leah Ralls and Doug Lary, who are on the line from the Willimantic branch, Windham-Willimantic branch of the NAACP. And, I'm not sure how familiar the two of you are, but with the lawsuit, but the NAACP did have a lawsuit that started in Connecticut challenging the constitutionality of gerrymandering, and it had been withdrawn in April. So maybe give us, if you can, some background on that and what the NAACP is doing relative to prison gerrymandering and voting, both in Willimantic and Windham, and also statewide. Doug or Leah, either of you can chime in on that.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Leah Ralls.
Hi, Leah.
Hi, I'm the president of the Windham branch of the NAACP, a branch that's been active for the last 3 years. So we are coming in, excited and ready to jump in on these issues of concern anywhere we can. In terms of the gerrymandering, we all know how detrimental that is to our Black communities, because the inmates who are being counted as residents of the cities where their prisons are, they're not getting any benefit from the money that's sent to those cities, or they're not getting any representation from the representatives. So we feel it's totally unfair. We want there to be some change with that. And I believe that statewide, we are working with legislator to make a change in that policy. As in terms of the lawsuit, I believe it's ACLU driven, and I guess it was stopped in Connecticut, but it's still going on a federal level. So I believe that ACLU is looking to make that change for federal prisoners. And of course, we would support that as well.
Thank you. Doug, did you want to
Thank you. Leah and I are both sitting on the Charter Revision Commission in Windham, our hometown. And we're getting a direct exposure to the impact of prison gerrymandering here in town. On one hand, of course, we have funding. It's rumored we were undercounted by 35% in 2010 at some cost of perhaps $2,900 per person undercounted. And the math for that comes out to something like $400 million over a 10-year period. Fairly dramatic numbers for a poor community. We also are aware that our town, which is split into 2 districts, you guessed it, white and rural and colored and city, just like the state, our town is split on those same borders, and prison gerrymandering impacts how many representatives on the town council each of those districts get. Shall it be 7-3, 8-2? That's sort of mathematics. Our school system is deeply impacted also by any underfunding. Currently, Windham is counted at about 55% instead of 65% last time. And so we're at great danger of being less well funded for a decade ahead. So those are local impacts that Leah and I are involved in looking at. And I also work as an regional election monitor, and I get involved in the actual redistricting boundaries with my local registrar when the legislature changes its boundaries. And counts matter for this sort of stuff. Your town can wind up with a bit of a second representative if its population is well counted, or it can lose representation or be spread more thinly if you are counted incorrectly. So we're rather aware of the difficulties with census counts, particularly prison gerrymandering as it affects our city district, and funding that arises from that. So I'm glad to participate here today with you. Leah, do you have anything else?
No, thank
No,
you
I'm
so
all
much.
set.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's it's really important to hear what the NAACP is doing. I know you referenced the suit, and I'm not sure if you have any information. We did reach out to folks from the Yale Law Clinic who have participated in the suit, and they were not available, so we don't have the exact information. But Alex, did you have any sense of that?
Yeah, so they've now switched focus to a legislative solution. There is another suit now out of Pennsylvania that is also another NAACP suit that's just starting down there. Yeah, I'm not sure what more information I can give you.
No, that's fine. I just, an update would be great, and that was what you provided. So just, I guess, knowing that, ways this can be addressed is both in the courts, but also through legislative action, gave us tremendous insight in what's possible with legislative action. And, one of the big takeaways, obviously, with all of this, and I want to thank all of the panelists, Michelle, Riordan-Nold, Aleks Kajstura, Leah Ralls, and Douglas Lary. And we tried to get Christine Patti on from Windham as well, but we were unable to do that. But thank you so much for all this information on the census. And, the bottom line seems to be make sure you're counted. And for those who are counted, there are ways that the legislature can address where they're counted. And we still have time to do that. So thank you all so much. We'll, again, provide information on the census on our ctreentry.org site, and I really appreciate your participation today. So now we'll move on to the panel discussion on direct action, and this is with both current and former elected officials, impacted people, business owners, and advocates, and we are joined again by Daryl McGraw from the IMRP and the Connecticut Reentry Collaborative, who will be moderating this portion of the event. Daryl?
First, I'd like to say, definitely thank you to everybody that was on a lot of information. I also would like to apologize to my panelists because, I know everyone has busy lives and time, so we're running a little behind. But we got some important topics to talk about, just really touch base on a lot of the stuff that was said and how we as community members, impacted people can really start to, have this conversation. How do we get involved? A lot of numbers being said, but I know there's a lot of people that I know are not counted in those numbers, and I want to bring you guys in on that conversation. I'd like to start off with Kathy Flaherty. Kathy, are you there?
I am the executive director of Connecticut Legal Rights Project. I cannot claim to be the legal director. That is the very talented Kirk Lary. And I have a feeling that the reason I was invited to this call was to talk about the lawsuit that Connecticut Legal Rights Project has filed in federal court against the governor, Demas, and the administrators of Connecticut Valley Hospital and Whiting Forensic Hospital in Middletown. I actually am putting into the chat the most current complaint, which is an amended complaint that we filed on May 7th. But one of the things that we realized very early was that people in inpatient psychiatric facilities were also at risk of getting sick and dying from COVID. And so, you know, we were very careful about the way we did our work, but we were also really concerned with what Demas was doing in terms of the facilities. Shutting down visits the same way that they shut down visits to prisons happened early. One difference is that under the Patient's Bill of Rights, people who are in inpatient psych facilities have the legal right to access to a phone, so they don't get charged for phone calls. The problem is that you have 20 people on a unit who are sharing the same phone, and is that even being adequately cleaned? But the biggest problem really was that people were testing positive for the virus, and they were only testing people who were symptomatic. People got sick, and people have died. So far, Demas has announced 4 people who have passed away from COVID. So we wrote a letter to the governor on April 18th saying these are our concerns. We did not get a response to that letter, not surprisingly, but more disturbingly, we didn't really see anything change. So we filed suit on April 30th. The Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law and the Center for Public Representation have both joined us as co-counsel in this lawsuit. And, you know, we are currently involved in settlement discussions with the state. We have engaged experts. Fortunately, we've applied for funding from a foundation that funds class action lawsuits. So we wouldn't be able to do that work without them. But it's, you know, as a lawyer, one would think that I might love going to court and suing people. It shouldn't have taken making a federal case out of this to push the department to do the right thing by the people it serves. And by the people it serves, most importantly, the patients who are in state-operated psychiatric facilities, but also their staff. Too many of their policies were basically based on the fact that the federal response was such a mess, that they didn't have adequate access to PPE, they didn't have access to testing. What I think would have been a lot smarter is if the state had joined all the independent community advocates who were advocating for a better federal response, as opposed to creating a response that was driven by the ineffective and inadequate federal response. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully we are able to reach some level of solution and moving forward in good ways. One thing that has been good is they have started testing. One thing that is not good is they are still having people come into the hospital and they're not really discharging anybody. So the units are as crowded as they ever were.
I wanted to thank you, Kathy. So just to give everybody on the call some background information, this is Make It Happen May. And what we're doing is Make It Happen May is that, and the reason why I brought you, Joe, and a bunch of other people, TJ, and all these other people on the call was to talk about how to, as community members, how do we make change?
What Daryl was saying, the Make It Happen, we'll talk about what got you to be advocates. We heard a result of Kathy's advocacy and all the work with the Keep the Promise campaign. What got you to be advocate? What got you to run for office? And how did your experience with the justice system inform your both running for office and also or becoming an advocate and what you do with that? So maybe we can go to State Rep Joe De La Cruz. He's from, I believe, Groton and New London. And it's so good to have you on, State Rep De La Cruz.
Well, what got me involved basically, it sounds so small, but I'm a coach at basketball, and when I brought my son over to Groton play, and my daughter started out first, I brought her first, and they eliminated the score at halftime because they didn't want to keep scoring. These girls were like 12 years old. So I called a friend and said, how do we change this locally? And basically I went to got on the RTM, became the chair of Parks and Rec, and we changed the rule where we keep scoring. Kids would know who won, who lost. And that's where it started, and I kind of got the bug. And I didn't realize how much of an activist I really was until I did get elected at the RTM, and realizing the power that even at that level that you have, because either you're going to fight for libraries to be open on Sunday, or you don't care because you're worried more about the budget. You're going to fight for a better school budget to bring all kids into the circle, or you're not going to do that. And that was at the lowest of form of government you could be in, other than just being a regular voter. And it was a twice a month meeting, and it was something that got me involved. And then when I got to the town council, I started realizing that you can start voting on policy, how the town runs, and not quite laws. That I didn't really feel that until I got up into the Hartford, and never really was questioned about my life experience of when it came to criminal justice system. I joke all the time. I'm Filipino, which is Asian and Pacific Islander. My mom, you've got my ancestry. It's almost everywhere on the map in the world. And I just thought I was a normal kid growing up, and my uncles look white. My dad's Filipino. I think I must be white. Then I got my driver's license and quickly realized that I wasn't. The first day I had my license, I got pulled over, and I got pulled over pretty much the first year. I would say probably maybe a dozen times the first year of my license, which is once a month. I actually laminated my registration to my insurance card because it was being used so much. And when I got pulled over by a cop one time, that was, she's coming down the hill, I'm going opposite, and there's no way. I mean, she just saw me, I know it. Turned around, passed 3 cars going up a hill, pulls me over, and I hand her this laminated registration. And she says, why would you laminate? I said, because I use it a lot. She says, well, why are you saying that? What's wrong? What are you trying to say? I'm not saying anything. I'm just telling you, this thing gets handled a lot. And I didn't realize it, like I said, until after. It was more of a joke for me, because we do live in a section of the state where I gotta be honest. I know my brothers and sisters that are in Hartford, New Haven, in these bigger cities where we're seeing, Black and Latino, Black and brown people actually having, issues where they're being, hurt and where they're getting killed. I've never felt fear of police in the section where I live. I felt like maybe I was getting, the pullover thing and those things happen, but I never felt threatened or in fear. And I think that's where we have this, the small town versus big town little fight that goes on that shouldn't have to happen. What I did notice is that we need to work with our own departments. In other words, my wife and I started a group, Community Speaks Out. We're impacted by addiction. My son brought it to our doorstep, and we learned about it. We didn't just learn about it and keep it to ourselves. Learned about it and brought it to the police stations, to the fire departments. And I think that's the kind of community action that really works. Because if you're from that big city or big town, we in our society, we only talk about things when they go horribly wrong, or when they're terrible. We want to make sure that we go back to police and tell them they did a good job. In our town, we've done that, and then tell them when they did a bad job, when things didn't work out so good. But you can't have that relationship if everything is the worst thing ever. Like when it's at its worst moment. And I think it's important that we just come together in each town like that. And I see the divide because I go home and they say, God, every bill that you guys talk about is geared towards hurting police, and it's because when they look at it, when they hear it from basically to the other side, they're portraying it as if we hate the police, that we don't like them, that Democrats inherently don't like police and don't like the way they do their job, and that's really not true. And I don't know how to bring us all together, I don't know how we knock that barrier down. I think we have to talk more, share good stories with each other, We don't do that enough. And, you know, again, that's going to be the fight here moving forward, because what just happened with the gentleman out in Minnesota. We know how that goes. For 3 months, people are going to be inflamed. It's probably going to take away from the coronavirus and all the bad that the president is doing right now. We're going to focus on that. We're not going to focus on how to fix the problem. And do I have the answer on that? I'm not sure I do. But again, I got involved and didn't realize how I was impacted by the criminal justice system. I graduated high school and went right to prison, and basically was supposed to be there 6 months. And luckily, because it was so crowded, I got out, and basically, I think it was maybe 8 days I was in jail for. And I was in and out of local jails for here and there. But I got in a lot of trouble as a kid. And I think what people don't realize, they say, well, it's, blacks and Latinos, they have more propensity to get arrested. Isn't that true? Look at the amount. It's more blacks and Latinos. And what I noticed with my son, because he's my stepson, he's white. My wife always paid his bills, always took care of his credit. There's no way we'll let him get in a car without insurance or registration. When I grew up, I didn't have the money. If I didn't have my insurance card, I couldn't afford it, I just drove anyway. So a lot of it has to do with what your economic standard is. So, if you're from a house where both parents have money, you're not going to get in those kind of trouble. You're not going to get in that kind of trouble, and it holds you up for a long time from actually getting in real trouble. So, so again, if you want to get involved, that was your question, Daryl. I'm sorry. Good to see you back on. If you want to get involved locally, and it doesn't have to be the big thing. You don't have to be the president of the United States to change something. You can change it locally. You can talk to a neighbor or help a friend out, and you'd be surprised how far that goes.
I appreciate it, Joe. I appreciate. Yeah, I'm back. My signal's back for who knows how long. I think my kids are sneaking upstairs gaming or something. So
there you go.
Yeah, I think they're stealing my thunder.
Daryl, I just wanted to weigh in for 1 second with Rep. Dela Cruz, because the stuff that you talked about, it's the first time we met, but we oversee the Alvin Penn Act, the traffic stops in the state, and we'd love to have you on and have that discussion. So thank you so much. And in that bug you caught, same thing happened to me when I was 28 years old, and a friend just out of the blue asked if I would like to be a sessional at the state legislature, and I had never really considered becoming civically engaged in that way. And then it was just seeing how in one bill can change something that I caught the bug as well. And then the process and the relationships and all that comes from that. It's that civic action, people may think that, it takes a huge amount to actually make a difference, but it's not. It's just that first step sometimes that gets you there. So thanks so much for that perspective.
I appreciate it. I didn't know you guys hadn't met, and I wanted to say that this is a panel full of people that I admire. Admire and see them doing the work in the community that keeps me going. Is Bill Dyson on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
How are you, Bill?
I'm fine. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I got an all-star cast, and having you here as well is an honor and a privilege. We're talking about a lot of different things, but we're talking about that's like action. How do we get involved? How do we get community members involved? Formerly incarcerated people, how do we get them involved in this, and in making some long-lasting change?
Well, there are a lot of pieces that go with it, and I think the first thing that I would want to share with people is that if you feel strongly about something, whatever that is, act on it. And if you feel strongly about something, act on it. Because if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. You think a change ought to come, it's not going to come unless you step out to make that happen. So if you feel strongly about something, act on it. And what happens is that you inspire other people. Other people see what it is that you're doing, and they get motivated. They come to the realization that they might be able to make a difference. And because they have reached that point of thinking they might be able to make a difference, they then inspire other people. And as they are inspiring other people, things are being learned by all of those who are involved as they move from one phase to the other. And you have to be a believer in wanting to make an adjustment, a change, doing something. Doing something is the key. It's like the previous speaker that just spoke. I mean, it's nothing like an experience that really sears into your brain the notion that, man, that's not right, and something needs to be done. And if you feel that something needs to be done, then you look around for others to share the same view. But you might not find others to share the same view until they think and believe that you care about what you're doing. Now you have something in common in all likelihood. And if you have something in common, that means you have an ally, someone that you can lean on for support, or someone that feels that you share something in common. Man, it is cruising now, because now you got momentum. You're believing, someone else who's witnessed what you're doing, believing, and then others see that the two of you are believing and want to act on it, and they want to be a part of it. It's nothing else but to find out what's going on. So you got to believe it. If you believe, you can change the world. You can change the world if you believe.
I appreciate that, Bill. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Daryl.
I was just gonna say I appreciate that, and then you're always when you mentioned the word inspiration, and I just wanted to get Mr. Deivone in on this conversation, because he's also impacted person, but made some super big moves with owning a restaurant, ran for mayor, and I'm truly inspired by him as well. And Deivone, you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here. I want actually great. I've been on, since you started, and I've been listening to everybody talk and chime in. And one thing I would say, especially me being a young kid, I'm 33 years old, so I have the younger generation, and then going into the mid generation, and a lot of the older generation inspired me too. So it's like I'm surrounded by a lot of wisdom and knowledge, and listening to everybody chime in on different topics is very beautiful, because just the brother you had on right now, he talked about action. He talking about action to inspire others. That's Absolutely. One of the main things we have to do. And one of the prime examples that I can feed off that is that recently my restaurant located in New Britain just fed over 1,400 people. We put together some dinners, and we fed the whole community of New Britain, not only New Britain, but people from all over the surrounding towns came. And one thing we noticed after that, I started getting random people walking into the restaurant, writing checks, sending checks to the restaurant, just out of nowhere, just wanting to donate to the cause of feeding Connecticut because of the action I put forth. So what he's talking about is 100% right. And I think that's the first thing we have to do. We have to lead by example. And when we set that example and lead by example, others see that and they're inspired to change or do something for their community. And if people keep at that, then eventually things will start to change and develop, and we all can get to the place where we want to get, which is to see massive change in our state and in our world.
Thanks so much, Deivone. I know one of the things that drew him to you is Daryl's love of food and the tremendous restaurant that you created there, and hearing what you've done through your inspired action, I'm sure is having an impact on your community. And I think we're finding that through our work with the Reentry Roundtable. There's a lot of people stepping up in a variety of ways to provide inspiration, and you're certainly one of those people. So thank you for being a part of this.
Absolutely.
And I know Kathy wanted to come back as well and talk about what made her an advocate and want to become an advocate. So maybe we can turn it back to Kathy, and then if Daryl comes back on, he'll help to ask some more questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I really appreciate the opportunity to be allowed back on because too many webinars, keeping track of what I was asked to speak at each one. For people who don't know me, the reason I am so involved in mental health advocacy is I was fully committed to psychiatric until my first year of law school. I spent 60 days locked up on an inpatient ward. So the work on behalf of our clients at CLRP is really important to me. Being able to co-chair the Keep the Promise Coalition has been critical to the last 5 years and really made it able for me to do this job at CLRP. And one of the most gratifying things about the work the last couple of years is aligning and realizing the relationship between what goes on for people who are in psychiatric institutions and what goes on for people coming out of jails and prisons. There's a lot, the reentry discussion is the same discussion, the risk of COVID is the same discussion. There are people with mental health conditions who are in the criminal legal system who shouldn't be, and because they don't get the services and supports they need from the mental health system. So really, we're all in this thing together, and developing those relationships has been super important in making us better at our job. So thanks for letting me come back and kind of tell my origin story. But because that's really why most of us do this work, because we have some personal connection to it, which means it's part of our heart. It's not just an intellectual exercise.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Deivone, maybe you could talk a little bit about too, because we are addressing in particular the issue of folks who have been impacted by the justice system. And, you know, time and again, we hear of folks and know of folks that are coming out of the system that face what Daryl talks about, the pebbles and the boulders, and would be inclined to maybe give up or turn a different path, even though they've come out and wanting to create change for their own individual life and maybe a bigger way, as you've done. You know, maybe talk about some of that obvious resilience that you've had, but I'm sure you've had your low moments as well as, you know, all of us do. And
Absolutely. It's and like you know, Kathy was speaking about, and her position is very, very serious. I love that because myself, 11 years old, I was sent to juvenile detention, Hartford juvenile detention at 11 years old. And from 11 years old to about 21 years old, I was in and out of the juvenile system. I've been to NYI at 14 years old. I've been to New Haven detention, Long Lane, Northern CI. And it's like, once you're in this cycle of this prison system, you know, it's so hard to get out.
It's so good to see you back on the street in New Britain there. That's we're not too far away where the IMRP is in downtown New Britain. There's a lot of good work being done in the area there. And I know Deivone also ran for mayor, I believe, the last time around. Maybe we'll head back to Bill Dyson. Bill, you know, you had a similar experience, right? When you first got involved, it was something that you wanted to do. Deivone, we'll come back to you in 1 second, okay?
Yeah, no problem.
Bill, some thoughts that you have about, you know, what is that first step sometimes? Is it local? Is it, you know, people are seeing all of this information about national news and international news and so many heavy things. But you know, I think probably per your experience and many of ours, sometimes it's the small things to start with that get you going.
Yeah, it's small stuff. It's people. You know, the system, prison system, has done a job on people. It has made them feel so insignificant that they are they're forgotten people. And because they are forgotten people, it's difficult at times to get them to believe that they can do something, that they can change something. And so what you have to do is that you have to include them, bring them along, encourage them, assist them in every way you can. And me, and the two things I point out. If you feel strongly enough about something, do something. If you feel strongly, do something. Because if you don't do it, nobody else is. You do it. Go do it. And the other was that I had a personal experience. I had my son get sentenced to prison. And you talking about pain, man, that was pain. That the one thing that I got out of it was that it was pain that I thought no one else understood. I mean, I was livid, ripped, just humiliated, just angry about it. Until people start saying something to me privately about their kids, but someone else would say something about their kids. And then I suddenly realized there are a whole bunch of people who are angry like me. There are a whole bunch of people that they don't know what to do. There are a whole bunch of people that been impacted by the criminal justice system and feel that they're just nobody. You know, they can do anything, you know. So it is out of those kind of experiences that you can begin to build among others who probably feel that they are just so unworthy that you can bring back some hope to them and into their lives. As they begin to act on what they believe, they begin to do what needs to be done. They begin to engage with other people. And that's what it happens. You find out you're not alone. There are a lot of other people out there got the same stuff you got that's going on. They just happen to come to your attention and say, wow, I didn't know you. Yeah, we got the same stuff, bro. So why don't we just get together and do this? And for me, it was around trying to help people get pardons. Trying to help them get pardoned. They just wanted to get themselves cleaned up. They wanted to be contributors to the society. They wanted to do things they thought were good things to do. That they just wanted to. They wanted to do something. And getting pardons was one way to get people to come together. I never thought I'd see people that came out, man, it just blew my mind. The people who had a need to get a pardon because they always kept it quiet, because they did not necessarily want it done, because of how our community and society viewed them. Thank you.
And, you know, fast forward 20 years, because I was working for you at the time, Connecticut has one of the most robust pardon systems in the country. It's one of the few that's actually not through the executive branch of the governor. But I also know that there's still a lot of work to be done to get people to leave that criminal past behind them and to be fully members of society. So that work continues. It's nothing that, happens overnight. So some of that staying power also is important. So Deivone, you were talking about your experience. I'd love to bring you back into the conversation. Yeah. Maybe have the last word here, because I know we're a little bit running over, but we had such a great a number of really inspirational guests today that we didn't want to end it early. So Deivone, maybe bring us back to where you were.
Yeah, so like I was saying, and being in and out of that juvenile detention, like we're speaking, that the pain that we have to go through as youth, and then coming into the adult world, and then our parents suffering, and our grandparents and our family members, like, we're also part of this community. So whether we made bad choices to get us in there or not, we still have to be looked at like human beings. We still have to be looked at like we have a chance. And then what happens is, you spend 2, 3, 4 years in the prison system, in a cell that's about this small, and you're locked up 23 hours in one, and they expect you to spend 2, 3, 4 years and come out with 3, 4 felonies and try to get a job with no tools, with no job training programs, with no one to help, no opportunities, nothing out there. So what happens is that cycle continues, and it leaves you right back in there. Our community is affected by poverty. Our community is affected by drug-infested communities. It's so hard to get out of ourselves. We We find any way we think we can, whether it's right or wrong, just to sometimes eat. And I experienced that from myself growing up with my parents being addicted to drugs, both of my parents, and us living in that home, actually seeing it at the age of 8, 9 years old, and thinking that that's all it is. So when I started acting out of anger and projecting those fears, they started transforming into a form of violence, into a form of crime, and it led me to sell drugs and end up in prison until I was in prison at the age of 22, 21, and I had a son that was 2, and I reflected and I said to myself, hold on, I don't have any guidance, but one thing I do have is I have a future. And if I continue this cycle, you know, and a lot of people don't have that power, that energy to think like this, but I said to myself, if I continue this cycle, my son will be in here. And then maybe his son, which is my grandkids, and that cycle will never end. So when I got released, it was hard. It was very hard, but I stuck to what I wanted to do. And, you know, I had to cut off some of my friends, you know, and now they're with me now on a positive note. But in the beginning, they didn't understand, but I had to be strong because that cycle was either going to continue to leave me in prison or I was going to end up dead. And one thing that is a blessing now is that I work with the same juvenile detention, MYI, that I went to when I was young. I work with the warden, I work with the Commissioner Cook, and now one of my programs that I started in New Britain is implemented in that prison system. And we're impacting the kids that I experienced. And one thing I tell people is that I lived it. So I have a better opportunity to guide people out and change their lives because I've been in that system for years and years. And now that I'm home, you know, she was speaking about a pardon. I received a pardon. I had 6 felonies and I didn't hire any attorney. I went and researched and I did the paperwork myself, and I was rejected 4 times over a period of 9 years. 4 times. Never know the reason why I was rejected, and I was impacting my community a couple years and I would apply again, denied. I would open up another business or a youth program and try to change people's lives and apply and deny. And it was never a reason until last year I was just granted a full pardon, which is a blessing, because not that I need it now to continue to elevate, but it holds you down. You know, those pardons really hold you down, and no one wants to hire you, and your back is against the wall, and the only thing that you have to do to feed your family is probably go out there and sell a nickel bag to get $5 or $10 to get some milk for your kid. Or, you know, it's the cycle. It's so crazy. So it's like we need help, and a lot of people say, well, the government, or no, we actually need real help. Our communities are affected by drugs, violence, guns, everything. And we just need opportunities. And one thing I noticed is that the more opportunities you give these kids, the more that these kids want to do positive things. But when you take out all the parks, when you take out, you know, all the activities, all the technology, everything, and these kids don't have an opportunity to do nothing, they're out in the streets. They're out in the streets acting up, and then they end up in jail or in prison, and then they get older, and the cycle just continues. And it's tough, but we need help, and we need people like yourselves and communities like this that's getting together to not only get together and speak on the issues, but speak and act on the issues and really make a real change and make things happen.
Thanks so much, Deivone. I'll say, you know, what got me involved 20 years ago was the fact that as a kid growing up in Farmington, I had numerous involvement in the justice system, but the most I ever spent was a day in jail just because of who I was. My father was an attorney, and the town at the time, you know, when I got involved, I went in front of the Juvenile Review Board. Their message to me was, we expect more of you. And, you know, when I had friends through Project Concern that lived in Hartford, and, you know, I went and lived in the city, and the more I learned about the justice system and the more I learned about some of the folks that were impacting the cities, they didn't have the same opportunities as me. So I wanted to be a voice. If they didn't have that opportunity. But the great thing is, over the 20 years that I've been doing this, so many people like you have come out and are lending their voice to the system and to change. Like Tahiba and Gus and Anderson and Larice and Beatrice, all these people, and Daryl, and it's more of a movement now, and it's so tremendously inspiring to hear what you're saying. I know that Daryl feels the same, and I believe he might be back on again. Well, just I think we'll take the opportunity to wrap up now. It's 11:45, and I want to thank everybody for participating. It's so inspirational to hear all of your stories of why you got involved, the direct action, and how just the feeling of it, the real desire to want to change, and then moving with that desire into doing something and what can be accomplished. It's just so amazing. And then going back to just individual actions, you don't have to change the world. A vote matters. Filling in your census form matters. And so making sure that we all do that. So I want to thank everybody for the last session and Make It Happen May with civic engagement. And certainly was inspirational for me and hopefully for other folks. And we appreciate everybody being on and lending your voice. So thank you so much from the Connecticut Reentry Collaborative. And we are planning on doing something in June. We probably won't be doing it every Wednesday, so look out for that. We'll be doing a recap of some of the things that we've talked about. And we look forward to seeing you in June. And until then, everybody stay safe and good to see you.
Take care, everybody.